So I ended last time just talking about how Alexander was winning these pivotal battles and that he was set to take over the known world. And the best thing to do is actually just to go right into the map here. Look at this amazing visual of what this man was able to accomplish in terms of leading military conquests. His father, had Macedonia, but then he went out and was set to conquer everything. And if you look, he set up places all over named after him. Alexandria is all over. The most common, the most popular Alexandria is going to later be in Egypt, Alexandria, Egypt, which we'll talk about in some detail a little later on. But what's also significant is that he comes up in here and he really does some damage on some towns that would try to resist him. The Jews who were living in Palestine at the time, they decide, hey, we're welcoming him as a victor, and they did not put up resistance. And there's a lot of legends about this meeting, which we'll see covered in just a little bit. And ultimately, he goes through, and he passes into Egypt. And what's interesting is that Egypt was under the imperial rule of Persia at the time. And the Persians were not that popular in Egypt. I'm not actually myself quite clear how information would travel back in those days, whether through birds with messages or people running to, in the exact nature. I know that those kind of methods were used in the past. Ultimately, the Persian administrators were aware that Alexander the Great was coming and that they had to make a choice, and they chose to not put up any resistance to Alexander the Great and his army. And so when Alexander comes in with his military into Egypt, the Persian ruling class pretty much puts their hands in the air and says, you want Egypt? It's yours. Take it. And offer their services. They basically say, we're not fighting this guy. And many Egyptians see him as, at this point, as a liberator. And so Alexander the Great just walks into Egypt and basically takes it. And he goes out to an oracle somewhere in the desert to ask them who his real father was. And the oracle wisely says, your real father is God, basically. And this is the kind of dramatic way in which he liked to do things. Remember, I told you he had a tendency for mysticism, but I do think he also liked to play into this kind of delusionalness, kind of megalomaniac ideas about himself. In any case, it is very impressive. I'm just going to walk right into a very ancient, famous nation, and everybody's just going to hand it over. And so from there on, he does some more warring and conquering. And, the methods in which he kind of goes from one place and then back to the other, you see here on the line. But you just look, it's quite amazing that he leaves his impact in so many different places. And so we're going to talk about that because in this section here, I just want you to watch. This is a very interesting perspective from the Jews on Alexander the Great. So remember, the Jews speak well of the Persians, but they also have a good relationship with Alexander the Great. And so while the Greeks and the Persians have this terrible relationship to mark out, at this point, well, you'll see the way that traditionally Jews have been conceptualizing the legacy of Alexander the Great here. So we'll just watch this clip.
JewishHistory.org presents Rabbi Beryl Wine's 5,000 Years of Jewish History. One video clip at a time. Clip number 16. Greek influence, and Alexander the Great.
Whenever there are major changes in world events, it seems to impact the Jewish people particularly. Alexander the great Greek leader, conquers the Persian Empire, conquers most of the known world, and he comes to the land of Israel in about 325 before the Common Era, just a few years before his death. There the Talmud tells us that he meets Simon the Righteous, Shimon HaTzadik, and is so impressed by the visage of Shimon HaTzadik and by the personality that he spares Jerusalem, he spares the temple, and so to speak, he continues on his way. Alexander will die 2 years later in 323, before the Common Era. The Jews remember Alexander. They made a commitment to him that all of the firstborn male children born during that year would be named Alexander. And that's how Alexander, a pure Greek name, enters the Jewish world. It became a standard Jewish name until our time. There are people today who are named Alexander, Sender. All of those names are derived from this event of Alexander's coming to the land of Israel. In addition, the Jews said, we're going to revamp our calendar. We're going to date not only from the creation of the world as we do now, but we're going to date from the time of Alexander, from the time of the Greek conquests. Now the Jews fudged on this a little. This became what was known as Minyan Shtarot, the official date that was used in legal documents. And year 1 was the year 312 before the Common Era, which in Jewish tradition is exactly 1,000 years after the Exodus from Egypt. And the Jews also now were subservient to the Greeks. They had to pay taxes, etc. And to a certain extent, Greek culture, certainly Greek names, filtered into the Jewish world. We find great rabbis who are named Antigone. And Greek became almost an accepted language. In the Mishnah, we find very many Greek words, vocabulary. For instance, the word afikoman, which in Greek means dessert, enters Jewish life and is part of the Seder services on Passover night throughout the Jewish world for the past 1,800, 2,500 years. And many Greek words enter Jewish culture, enter Jewish society, and the Jews will now have to contend not only with the physical domination of the Greeks, but also with the cultural identity that they have to attempt to restore to themselves. Alexander dies. He leaves no successor, so there is a contest for succession. In the southern kingdom, which included Egypt and North Africa, Ptolemy, one of his great generals, becomes the emperor. In the northern kingdom, which included Syria, Turkey, Anatolia, well, there Seleucus becomes the emperor. Both of them were generals under Alexander the Great. Now they compete with each other. Now guess, my friends, which little country is lodged between the Southern Empire and between the Northern Empire? Naturally, it's the land of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, and therefore the Jews have to choose, so to speak, between Seleucus in the north and between Ptolemy in the south. The Jews always favored the Egyptian Empire, always favored the Ptolemaic Empire, but the northern kingdom always attempted to conquer Israel, use it as a buffer and as a base against the Ptolemaic Empire in the south. And this, my friends, brings us pretty much to the story of Hanukkah, a story which I'm going to share with you on the next segment of this series. Thanks again for watching.
For more on Jewish history.
All right, so that should give you a good idea. I'll end there, and I'll kind of cover a few points on that he discussed as well.